Who were the Nephilim? Giants, warriors, legends. In the Bible, there are numerous references to giants, particularly Goliath and his brothers, who struck fear into the hearts of the people of Israel. But where did they come from? What does the Bible truly say about Goliath, his brothers, and the mysterious Nephilim? Join us as we explore the ancient biblical texts and uncover the truth behind one of the Bible's most mysterious and terrifying stories. Our story begins in the early chapters of the Bible, in the time before the Great Flood, when strange and powerful beings walked the earth, beings known as the Nephilim. Mentioned briefly in Genesis 6:1-4, the Nephilim are described as a race of giants, born from the union of the sons of God and the daughters of men. But who were they, and what role did they play in the ancient world? The Bible tells us that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward. But what does this mean? Scholars have debated for centuries who the sons of God were. Some believe these were fallen angels who took human women as wives, while others suggest they were powerful human rulers. Regardless of the interpretation, their offspring, the Nephilim, were described as giants, heroes of old, men of renown. The term Nephilim is often translated as fallen ones or giants. Their presence on the earth coincided with a time of increasing wickedness, which ultimately led to God's decision to bring about the flood and cleanse the world of corruption. The Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish text not included in the canonical Bible, expands on this story, suggesting that these beings brought violence and chaos to the earth, teaching mankind forbidden knowledge and leading them astray. As humanity's wickedness grew, God's patience reached its limit. In Genesis 6:5, we read that God saw how the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and thus he decided to send a flood to wipe out nearly all life. Many believe that part of the reason for this flood was to cleanse the earth of the corruption introduced by the Nephilim and their angelic fathers. Yet, even after the flood, the Nephilim reappeared. The Bible tells us that these giants were not entirely wiped out. They emerged again after the flood, particularly in the land of Canaan, where they became formidable opponents for the Israelites. After the flood, we find references to the descendants of the Nephilim in several places in the Bible. In Numbers 13:33, when the Israelites sent spies to scout out the land of Canaan, they reported seeing giants. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. The spies were so terrified of these giants that they described themselves as mere grasshoppers in comparison. These descendants, known as the Anakites, the Rephaim, and other giant tribes, would go on to become some of the most fearsome enemies the Israelites ever faced. Goliath and his brothers, whom David and his warriors would later confront, are believed by many to be part of this same lineage of giants. The presence of giants in the Bible raises many questions. Were these giants simply a genetic anomaly? Or did they carry the ancient bloodline of the Nephilim, a remnant of the beings that once walked the earth before the flood? As we will see, Goliath and his brothers are linked to this mysterious race, representing one of the final echoes of the Nephilim in biblical history. Goliath of Gath, arguably the most famous giant in the Bible, was a Philistine warrior whose very presence instilled fear in the hearts of Israel. His story, recorded in 1 Samuel 17, is not just a tale of physical might, but also a spiritual battle between faith and fear. But Goliath wasn't just an ordinary man. His towering height, immense strength and lineage connected him to the giants of old, believed by many to be descendants of the Nephilim. Goliath's height was recorded as 6 cubits and a span, which is over 9 feet tall in modern measurements. Armed with a spear the size of a weaver's beam, his armor alone weighed more than what most soldiers could carry. But Goliath wasn't the only giant from Gath. He had 4 brothers, all of whom were warriors in their own right, descended from the same giant lineage. These brothers, like Goliath, were part of the Rapha, another name for the giant clans that inhabited the region. In 1 Samuel 17, Goliath stands before the armies of Israel, defying them and their God. For 40 days, he taunted Israel, daring them to send a champion to face him. His size and strength made him invincible in the eyes of the Israelites, and no one dared to step forward. At over 9 feet tall, armed with a spear that could easily pierce any armor, Goliath was a terrifying presence. His defiance was not only a challenge to Israel, but to God himself. Yet Goliath's arrogance would be his downfall. The story of David and Goliath is one of the most well-known in the Bible. But few realize that Goliath wasn't just a powerful warrior. He was part of a much larger lineage, a legacy of giants that Israel would face again and again. Goliath's brothers were no less formidable. In 2 Samuel 21, we learn about the final battles between David's men and the giants. These brothers were also descended from the Rapha, or Rephaim, a race of giants that continued to threaten Israel after the time of Joshua. Among these brothers was Ishbi-benob, a giant who wielded a spear with a bronze tip weighing 300 shekels, about 7.5 pounds. He sought to kill David, but was stopped by David's warrior Abishai, who struck down the giant before he could harm the king. Another of Goliath's brothers was Saph, a giant warrior also slain by one of David's mighty men. Then there was the unnamed giant, described as having 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, a genetic abnormality that marked him as part of the ancient lineage of giants. Though these giants were fearsome and powerful, each of them fell in battle, defeated not by human strength but by the hand of God working through David and his warriors. Goliath's brothers, like him, were mighty warriors who defied God's people, but their strength and size, like Goliath's, could not stand against the power of God. Each of these giants, despite their terrifying presence, was brought down by faith, courage, and divine intervention. The defeat of Goliath and his brothers marks the end of an era of giants. Yet their story continues to inspire, reminding us that no obstacle is too great to overcome when we place our trust in God. Long before David stood against Goliath, the Israelites encountered giants in the land of Canaan, the land promised to them by God. These giants, believed to be descendants of the Nephilim, struck fear into the hearts of the Israelites, causing many to doubt God's promise of victory. But who were these giants, and how did they come to inhabit the land of Canaan? In Numbers 13, Moses sent 12 spies to scout the land of Canaan. 10 of them returned with a fearful report speaking of giants, descendants of the Nephilim who roamed the land. These giants, called Anakites, were so large that the spies felt like grasshoppers in comparison. The sight of these massive beings overwhelmed them, and their fear spread like wildfire throughout the camp. The Anakites were known for their great size and strength, and their presence terrified the Israelites. The 10 spies, overwhelmed by what they had seen, believed that it was impossible to defeat such a people, despite God's promise to deliver the land into their hands. Although God had promised victory, the fear of the Nephilim's descendants caused the Israelites to doubt. They rebelled against God's command to take the land and even considered returning to Egypt. Only 2 of the 12 spies, Joshua and Caleb, believed that God could lead them to victory, urging the people to trust in his power rather than be intimidated by the giants. The Anakites were not the only giants in the land of Canaan. Other giant clans roamed the land, such as the Rephaim, the Zuzim, and the Emim, all believed to be linked to the ancient Nephilim. These groups were spread across Canaan and its surrounding regions, creating a formidable obstacle for the Israelites as they sought to conquer the Promised Land. The Rephaim in particular were a powerful giant race. One of their most famous kings was Og of Bashan, who ruled over the land east of the Jordan River. According to Deuteronomy 3:11, Og's bed was made of iron and measured over 13 feet long, a testament to his enormous size and strength. Despite the presence of these terrifying giants, God promised victory to the Israelites. Under the leadership of Joshua, the Israelites began their conquest of Canaan. Hebron, a city once inhabited by the Anakites, was captured by Caleb, one of the 2 spies who had trusted in God's promise. Caleb, at the age of 85, led the charge against the Anakites, proving that faith in God could overcome even the greatest of enemies. Hebron, once a city of giants, became part of Israel's inheritance, and the reign of the Anakites was ended. Elsewhere, Joshua and the Israelites defeated King Og and the Rephaim, bringing an end to the reign of giants in Bashan. Though these giants were powerful, they could not stand against the God of Israel. With faith and obedience, the Israelites conquered the land, fulfilling God's promise despite the seemingly impossible odds. For centuries, stories and legends have persisted of giants walking the earth, beings so large and powerful that they left a permanent mark on history. But after the biblical accounts of the Nephilim and their descendants, we're left with one lingering question. Could they still be among us? Did all the giants truly disappear, or do remnants of the Nephilim bloodline still exist today? Throughout history, there have been reports of giant skeletons being found in places far beyond the biblical lands. From North America to Europe to Asia, archaeologists and explorers have unearthed bones of extraordinary size, leading many to speculate that these discoveries are linked to the ancient giants of the Bible, perhaps even to the Nephilim. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, multiple accounts of giant skeletons emerged in North America, particularly in places like the Ohio River Valley and the American Southwest. These skeletons, some measuring over 9 feet tall, were discovered in burial mounds and ancient sites. Reports from local newspapers and early archaeologists captured the imagination of the public, drawing comparisons to the biblical Nephilim. Reports of these findings often drew headlines, with many speculating that these giants could be remnants of an ancient race, perhaps even connected to the Nephilim. However, these discoveries were often met with skepticism by mainstream archaeologists, and many of the bones and artifacts mysteriously disappeared or were dismissed as hoaxes. Some claim that these findings were covered up by academic institutions, either because they didn't fit the mainstream narrative or because they raised uncomfortable questions about the history of humanity. Whether these skeletons are real or part of an elaborate myth, the stories continue to circulate, leaving many to wonder if there is more to the story of giants than we've been told. Another intriguing theory is that the Nephilim bloodline could have survived through intermarriage with human populations. Some believe that traces of giant genetics could still be present in modern humans, manifesting in unusual physical traits such as gigantism or extraordinary strength. Could this be evidence of the ancient Nephilim's influence still lingering in human DNA today? While gigantism is a well-documented medical condition affecting only a small percentage of the population, some have speculated that it may be connected to ancient bloodlines, traces of the Nephilim that have persisted through time. This theory suggests that rather than disappearing completely, the Nephilim may have left a lasting imprint on the human genome, with their characteristics emerging in rare cases today. It's not just the Bible that speaks of giants. Cultures around the world, from the Greek Titans to the Norse Jotun to the giants of Native American lore, have told stories of colossal beings who once walked the earth. These legends, while varying in detail, all seem to echo a common theme. Giants existed in the distant past, and their legacy is still remembered today. In Greek mythology, the Titans were considered primordial gods, beings of immense power and size who ruled before the Olympian gods. Similarly, in Norse mythology, the Jotun were powerful giants who represented chaos and the forces of nature, often in conflict with the gods. Even in ancient Native American traditions, there are stories of giant beings who lived in the land long before modern humans. Could these legends be distant memories of the Nephilim or similar beings? Some believe that these global myths might be echoes of a real race of giants that once existed, a race that left its mark on the collective memory of humanity. The story of Goliath is not just a tale of physical victory, but one of profound spiritual significance. As we reflect on the Nephilim and their descendants, such as Goliath and his brothers, we must ask ourselves, what do these giants represent in the grand narrative of the Bible? What deeper spiritual truths can we draw from these stories? In the Bible, giants like Goliath symbolize much more than mere physical strength. They represent forces of evil, defiance against God, and obstacles that seem insurmountable in human eyes. Goliath, standing over 9 feet tall and armed to the teeth, was an embodiment of human arrogance, believing that sheer might could defy God and his people. Goliath's challenge to the Israelites was more than just a physical battle. It was a spiritual one. Goliath represented human pride, trusting in weapons, strength, and size, while David, armed only with faith, came in the name of the Lord. In this moment, Goliath became a symbol of all the forces in the world that defy God's authority, thinking that they can stand against him through sheer power. David's victory over Goliath is a testament to the power of faith over fear, humility over pride, and spiritual strength over physical might. While Goliath saw himself as invincible, David's faith in God shattered that illusion, reminding us that no giant, physical or spiritual, can stand against the Almighty. The Nephilim and their descendants, the giants of Canaan, are more than just historical figures. They are spiritual metaphors for the obstacles and fears that stand in the way of God's promises. In the wilderness, when the Israelites first saw the giants in the Promised Land, their fear led them to doubt God's promise. These giants became symbols of the challenges that seem too great to overcome, obstacles that make us question whether God is truly with us. Like the Israelites, we too face giants in our lives, whether they come in the form of fear, doubt, or overwhelming challenges. The Nephilim, in this context, represent those things in our lives that seem too big to conquer, the trials that make us feel small and powerless. But just as God promised the Israelites victory over the giants in Canaan, He promises us that no obstacle is too great when we trust in Him. When David defeated Goliath, it wasn't just a victory for Israel, it was a spiritual victory. The giant that had terrorized and intimidated the people of God was brought down by a shepherd boy with a simple stone, guided by faith. This victory reminds us that with God, even the mightiest giants must fall. The story of Goliath and the Nephilim is a reminder that the true battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the spiritual forces that seek to defy God's will. And no matter how overwhelming those forces may seem, God's power is greater. The giants of the world, whether literal or symbolic, can never stand against the faith of God's people. The story of Goliath, his brothers, and the Nephilim isn't just about ancient battles or physical giants. These figures represent something much deeper. They are symbols of the spiritual and personal challenges we all face, forces that seem too large, too powerful, and too intimidating for us to overcome on our own. But the Bible shows us, time and time again, that no challenge is too great when God is with us. Goliath and the giants of the Bible teach us about the battles we face in life, both visible and invisible. Just as David stood against Goliath, we are called to stand against the giants in our lives, whether they come in the form of fear, doubt, sin, or overwhelming obstacles. The giants may seem invincible, but as David showed us, with God's strength we can face them without fear. Every one of us faces giants. For some, they take the form of personal challenges, overwhelming fears, doubts, or sins that seem too great to conquer. For others, they may be external forces, obstacles that seem impossible to overcome in our families, careers, or health. These giants, like Goliath, loom over us, taunting us, making us feel small, weak, and incapable of victory. But Goliath's story reminds us that even when we feel like grasshoppers before the giants in our lives, God is bigger than any obstacle we face. Like David, we don't need to rely on our own strength or power. Instead, we rely on the power of God, trusting that He will guide us through every battle. David's victory over Goliath wasn't due to his physical prowess or his military training. He was just a young shepherd boy with a simple sling and 5 smooth stones. What set him apart was his faith in God, a faith that was stronger than Goliath's sword, spear, and javelin. David's weapon wasn't the stone, it was his unwavering belief that God was with him. Like David, we too have been given the tools to face our giants: faith, prayer, and the Word of God. These may seem simple compared to the weapons of the world, but they are the most powerful tools we have. For the battle is the Lord's, and with His strength we can overcome anything. In life, we often face giants that are invisible, giants of fear, doubt, anxiety, or temptation. These giants may not be as physically imposing as Goliath, but they can be just as intimidating. Yet as with David, God calls us to face these giants not with fear but with faith. God never intended for us to fight these battles alone. Just as He was with David, He is with us, providing us with strength, courage, and the tools to overcome. The giants in our lives may be powerful, but they are no match for the power of God working through us. In the end, the story of Goliath and the Nephilim reminds us that no matter how great the obstacles in our lives may seem, God is greater. The giants we face, whether they are physical, emotional, or spiritual, are not invincible. With God on our side, no enemy is too powerful, no challenge too great, and no fear too overwhelming. So, when you face your giants, remember the story of David and Goliath. Trust in God, wield the weapons of faith, and know that in Him, every giant must fall. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the biblical story of Goliath and the Nephilim. If you were inspired by this message, don't forget to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe for more insights into the hidden truths of the Bible. Together, let's continue to grow in faith, face our giants, and trust in the God who gives us the victory.